Trump White House was enjoying a relatively positive news cycle, reacting to the president's speech to Congress. But Mr. Trump paid tribute to a fallen Navy SEAL, and his widow stood with tears in her eyes. Politicians on both sides of the aisle said that moment was genuinely moving.
Well, even CNN analyst Van Jones, one of Mr. Trump's harshest critics, applauded the way he honored Ryan and Karine Owens.
He became president of the United States in that moment, period. There are a lot of people who have a lot of reason to be frustrated with him, to be fearful of him, to be mad at him. But that was one of the most extraordinary moments you have ever seen in American politics, period.
But many liberals, especially on social media, are not, let's emphasize not, pleased with Van Jones over his praise for the president.
Our next guest, CNN political commentator Angela Rye, is one of them. So, Angela, you know, Van saw that moment. It's good to have you here, by the way.
Yeah,
Thank you for
good to be
stopping
here.
by. Van saw that moment as the making of a president. The ladies on The View today, they thought it was exploitation. Listen to this.
I thought that was so exploitive. I thought he exploited that widow. It was so heartbreaking to me because we know that U.S. military officials have said to the press that Obama didn't give the green light because he felt that the mission would mark a significant escalation in Yemen, and that President Trump, without the intel, without the appropriate ground support, approved this at dinner while not in the Situation Room and was tweeting. So when I look at that, I think, my God, how do you exploit the woman who is grieving over the loss of her husband, the father of her children, when you sent him there without the appropriate ground support?
Okay, is it possible to separate the politics behind the death of Ryan Owens, just allow the commander-in-chief, regardless of who that person is, to honor the widow of for the service of her husband, at least just do it for a moment?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the challenge is this is a very divided moment in our nation's history, and Donald Trump has people who are supporters no matter what he does, and he has detractors no matter what he does. I understand Van's point. I'm not one of the Twitter hot-headed liberals that you all described me as we came in, and I think we had a great conversation early on the network where I think he was able to clarify his points. I don't necessarily believe that Donald Trump was trying to exploit this woman. I don't believe that. But I also don't believe that he has genuine intent like ever. So I think I am on the polar opposite side of, what I believe, in terms of him being a decent human being. And I think that moment was not him being presidential. I think it was a moment of him being a decent human being.
But would you accept it's a moment that still holds a certain power for him that he can exploit in days to come? Because it did seem to resonate with everyone. It was like it was the headline from the speech.
Sure, and I think the reality of it is there were a number of moments in the speech that were troubling, right? I think that a lot of people are distracted about the tone, like all of a sudden Donald Trump sounds presidential. What does that mean if the words that you're using, despite the fact, as you said earlier, you're not screaming for once, right? You used your inside voice, but the policies that you're still pushing are just as treacherous, dangerous, divisive, racially insensitive, culturally insensitive, religious, in terms of religious bigotry. All of that is still there front and center. I think we can't let him off the hook for that.
What about to Van's point that yes, he was being very complimentary towards Donald Trump, but he was also issuing this warning to liberals that when you ask for the president to change his tone, when you ask for him to be more inclusive, when you ask him to use his indoor voice and to take the office seriously, when he does those things, you should acknowledge that because the guy can't be wrong 24/7.
But the guy can be wrong if the policies are still wrong. So the same day of his speech, they dialed back the regulations behind the clean water rule when we still have a Flint crisis on our hands and so many more Flints that have never made the news. That same day that he said that, Jeff Sessions, who is now under fire for all things Russia, pushed out a statement saying that he was no longer interested in pursuing the lawsuits against police departments. This is the same administration where the Secretary of Education is saying that HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities in this country, represent school choice. I'm sorry, there was slavery and segregation. There are still immense challenges with this administration, and that is what we should be holding their feet to the fire on. Forget whether he's screaming or being quiet.
We have very little time left, but I'm going to ask you this. Sure, given that the president showed that he can pivot, at least use his inside voice, have Democrats, have liberals found an effective way to stand against him, to oppose him?
Yeah, on the policies. And to your point, when you have to reduce the standard of what it means to be presidential on whether or not someone is using their inside voice, we've got a problem on our hands. I used to not have an inside voice in the library at school. That is not the standard we're using. We're talking about the leader of the free world. We're talking about someone who's supposed to represent us on a global stage, and given this platform that we're on right now, that's serious business, not an inside voice.